Dear YouTube, as you know, under copyright law, I am allowed to use portions of copyrighted material, in this case copyrighted material belonging to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania, so long as this is used for the purpose of criticism and parody. Please remember this when Watchtower comes complaining, because I've embarrassed them by using their propaganda in a way they disapprove of. Thank you. Hello viewers, you'll be pleased to hear that it's time for another JW Broadcasting rebuttal video.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear.
In this video we'll be taking a look at the May 2017 episode.
That sounds so exciting.
Which is hosted by governing body member Geoffrey Jackson. Would you like to see it?
Well, of course, I'd love to see it.
Okay, well, in that case, let's roll the first clip.
That's wonderful. Let's have a look.
Jag ser fram emot att
I look forward to not having poor sight anymore, and that I can play with a bear and a lion and just sit on the back of a tiger.
So this first segment focuses on a little girl called Talita, who unfortunately was born with a condition requiring her doctors to operate on her when she was a baby, and if they didn't operate on her she would lose all of her eyesight. But by operating on her they managed to salvage a small bit of eyesight in one of her eyes. So she's basically almost blind. But what's really sad, as we're going to see, is the way her condition is being milked for propaganda value, and also the fact that she's been sold a series of lies about one day getting her eyesight back again.
Jehovah gives us a fantastic promise in Isaiah 35:5. The eyes of the blind will be opened.
Just because something is written in the Bible doesn't make it a promise. In the case of the passage referred to in Isaiah, this is part of a restoration prophecy that promises wondrous miracles to be bestowed on Israel if they are obedient to God. It doesn't say that children born thousands of years in the future will have their eyesight restored to them. And it certainly doesn't say that this will only be possible if these children align themselves with a certain branch of fundamentalist Christianity based out of New York. To read that much into the verse is to indulge in wish thinking on an epic scale. Wish thinking that can only end in disappointment once the person realises they've been conned.
It's been a challenge to get to where we are today. We thank Jehovah for all the help he has given us.
Jehovah is here thanked for easing the predicament of a beautiful little girl born with next to no eyesight. But if Jehovah is all-powerful and all-loving, and if he is a God who selectively intervenes in Earth's affairs when it comes to assisting various projects that benefit Watchtower, my question would be, why didn't he step in to stop Talita from being born with this disorder in the first place? Surely, if anything, he is culpable for failing to intervene, or for prioritising mundane interventions over this one. When children are born blind, this is not something we should be praising God for, quite the opposite.
As soon as Talita was able to leave the house after the operation, we made sure to go to the meetings.
It helped us a lot to be able to throw our burden on Jehovah. We prayed together, we cried a lot together, because it was so hard.
Throwing one's burden upon Jehovah is something that Jehovah's Witnesses are repeatedly urged to do. In fact, there is an entire song devoted to throwing your burden on Jehovah, Song 33 in the newest songbook. It essentially involves putting complete trust in God in times of hardship or injustice. conveniently without any need on God's part to prove that he is doing anything. It's similar to the advice given to elders that if there are not 2 witnesses to an act of wrongdoing, including child abuse, they are to leave matters in Jehovah's hands. In other words, do nothing.
One of the challenges is that we have to give Talita audio description constantly. We have to tell her who is coming in and what is happening.
We get so many amazing materials on jw.org and also through the congregation. She really loves to read Learn from the Great Teacher. It has questions which make her a part of the story.
Ah yes, the amazing materials provided by Watchtower with the aim of indoctrinating the next generation of Jehovah's Witnesses. In this brief clip, we have seen the Caleb and Sophia cartoons and the My Book of Bible Stories on show. Special mention is also made of the 2003 book Learn from the Great Teacher, which also expertly uses presupposition, flawed reasoning, and fear to manipulate the impressionable minds of young ones. It's probably just as well that Talita won't be able to take in the full horror of the artwork on page 243, which depicts terrified people running for their lives as fireballs rain down at Armageddon.
I really like to sing the songs in my songbook.
Talita's spiritual goal is to learn more of our kingdom songs. We get so much help from the beautiful music on the website and also from the Caleb and Sophia videos.
Music is an excellent way to pummel young minds into submission. Sing the same songs of devotion to an organisation week after week, and it won't be long before it takes only a few notes of that music to trigger strong feelings of pride and allegiance to the beliefs of your parents. If you happen to be okay with shamelessly hijacking young minds by superimposing onto them unflinching allegiance to unfounded dogma, you also can't go wrong with the Caleb and Sophia cartoon series, in which a young JW boy and girl are taught, among other things, that falling asleep at meetings will lead to death at Armageddon, that it's advisable to badger fellow kids at school with judgmental, homophobic nonsense, and that you will end up old, shriveled and miserable like sinful Adam and Eve unless you throw out any plastic toys that make Jehovah sad.
She knows many of the stories from my book of Bible stories, so she can answer in her own words.
No traumatized Jehovah's Witness upbringing would be complete without repeated exposure to my book of Bible stories, the 1978 Yellow Book of Nightmares that was carefully crafted to terrify children with images of people being murdered, more people being murdered, people being strangled, people drowning, sons being almost murdered by their fathers, people being turned to salt, more about that later, people being whipped, children being killed, more people drowning, people being attacked by snakes, animal cruelty, people falling to their deaths, people with wooden stakes driven into their heads, more people falling to their deaths, people throwing spears at other people, babies being almost murdered, women being thrown from windows, and a man nailed to a post. If by any chance you don't consider artwork of this nature to be appropriate for children, you'll be pleased to hear that Watchtower is releasing a new version of the book titled Lessons You Can Learn from the Bible, with considerably less violence and gore than its 1978 predecessor. And this is the video they will be using to promote it.
People of all ages, but especially young ones, will enjoy this new 240-page book containing 103 lessons. The artwork is new and has been extensively researched, bringing the Bible to life and capturing the feelings of those depicted. Parents will appreciate that each section starts with a preview of the key lessons you can emphasize. Our hope is that all ages will enjoy this gift from our loving Father Jehovah as we all discover new lessons we can learn from the Bible.
Unfortunately, though the new book is a big improvement on my book of Bible stories, it does still contain some disturbing imagery, including fiery destruction from heaven, a woman being executed for looking the wrong way, a father preparing to stick a knife in his son because of voices in his head, God killing people by making the ground swallow them up, a king suggesting that butchering a baby would be a great way to settle a maternity dispute, a woman being thrown from a window, and a man slowly dying after being nailed to a wooden post. Mind you, in all fairness, if a book telling the story of the Bible were to feature absolutely no examples of injustice, violence, or death, I guess it wouldn't be doing its job.
When I give an answer at the meetings, Jehovah becomes happy because he loves children.
She often asks the friends, "Do you love Jehovah?" So she feels very united with them.
Talita is learning from a young age to value people according to whether they share her religious convictions. How lovely.
My parents are not Jehovah's Witnesses, and her grandmother had said that God doesn't exist. So when Talita came home, she said, "And then when I was going to sleep, I prayed to Jehovah. Would you please help grandmother to realize that you do exist, that you are real?"
So this little anecdote is included seemingly with the aim of impressing upon us how much faith Talita has. And unquestionably, she has a lot of faith. She's bound to have a lot of faith because she's been indoctrinated since she was a baby as a Jehovah's Witness. But we have this story to highlight this faith involving her grandmother, who sounds to me as though she's an atheist. Actually, I say she's an atheist. Most atheists do not assert God does not exist. Most atheists, or at least every atheist that I've met, is an agnostic atheist. In other words, they say, we can't prove that God doesn't exist, but especially when we're talking about a theist God, as mentioned in the Bible, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the burden of proof is on the person who believes in such an entity. In this case, Talita's grandmother is making an assertion that God doesn't exist, and Talita's answer is simply to go home and pray to God that he will give evidence to Talita's grandmother that he will exist. This actually seems to be the go-to response for most believers that I've encountered. They seem to adopt this approach of, well, you're asking me for evidence, but you just wait and see. All you need to do is open your heart and pray for evidence, and God will provide that evidence to you. This, of course, entirely overlooks the fact that if you've already made the leap of saying a prayer to a God, you're already inviting belief in him. You're already willing to accept more or less anything, including a positive feeling, as evidence of his existence.
We often talk about what we will do in paradise. We really look forward to when Talita will be able to see again, living in a paradise with all our friends. It's going to be wonderful.
I can think of lots of words to describe unending life in a paradise that has been built over the corpses of billions who have been slaughtered for the crime of not being Jehovah's Witnesses. Wonderful is not one of them.
I think that Jehovah looks forward to looking at me when I play with a tiger.
We're going to see some pretty horrendous examples of manipulative, coercive propaganda that plays on emotions in this rebuttal video. And this is right up there with the worst. By showing this video, the governing body is essentially saying to Jehovah's Witnesses, look at Talita. Don't you want her to have her eyesight again? Don't you want her to be playing with tigers in the paradise? Well, if so, why wouldn't you believe what we're telling you? The whole thing is designed to entirely bypass logic and reason and appeal directly to the emotions in the most distasteful way.
I'll have to make sure that I remember the names of Joseph's brothers in case I meet Talita and she decides to quiz me.
Self-deprecating humour would be far more endearing coming from someone who does not break up families in cases where his self-proclaimed role as a spokesperson for the Almighty is not sufficiently recognised.
Her parents have done a good job in raising such a fine young sister, and together with them, we eagerly look forward to the benefits of the new system. Isaiah 35:5 says, "At that time, the eyes of the blind will be opened."
Few things are more distasteful than making a promise to a child that you cannot possibly keep, especially when you are promising that she will stop being blind if only she will continue unquestioningly observing your authority as a religious leader.
This brings us to our music video, which is entitled, "I Keep Your Reminders."
What should I do?
Oh dear, a Jehovah's Witness at work has been given an invitation to the office Christmas party. What will she do? Clearly the logical course of action would be for her to mull over this burning dilemma using the medium of song. And by that I mean singing in public, while she's walking around to and from places.
Who should I look to? Oh, what is the right course for me? Which path will it be?
Welcome to another episode of JW Broadcasting, the musical. Because apparently what Jehovah's Witnesses want are cheesy, tacky, lip-synced evangelical music videos. Singing for us in this video is a Jehovah's Witness woman who's had to go through the ordeal of being invited by her workmates to the office Christmas party, which, as we all know, could be excessive with many dangers there.
It could be excessive with many dangers there. All the kinds of things that could prove to be a snare. Oh, what is the right course for me? Jehovah, give ear to my plea. I keep your reminders and I love them dearly.
Presumably, it's easier and less awkward to participate in door-to-door ministry when you're not singing to yourself.
All the things I have heard in accord with your word, help me understand. I know what's required.
What's required by your religious leaders is for you to not celebrate Christmas. Neither are you allowed to socialise with people who are not Jehovah's Witnesses. After all, it wouldn't be much of a cult if you could celebrate whatever you want and hang out with whoever you like. Therefore, there is only one thing left to do. Decline the invitation, arrange an alternative social gathering just for Jehovah's Witnesses. Oh, and sing a bit more?
I don't want to act in a way to cause offense. But it sounds like there likely would be consequence.
Now, I'm no expert when it comes to attending office Christmas parties because, as it turns out, I've turned down a fair few myself during my years as a witness. Despite my lack of experience, my guess is that when you go to such a party, you either have a good time with people you know well, or, worst case scenario, you find yourself in an uncomfortable situation, in which case there is nothing stopping you from making your excuses and leaving. There are zero bad consequences in either event. On the other hand, turning down invitations year after year could have the consequence of making you appear aloof or antisocial to your workmates. Not that you should be overly concerned with what others think of you, but bottom line, any decision on whether or not to do something should be based on what you want to do, not on prudish demands imposed by a doomsday cult that teaches that everyone who isn't a believer deserves to be annihilated at some future date. But never mind all that, it looks like this lady's mind is made up. There really is no choice but to take back the invitation and go buy some flowers.
It's clear what's the right course for me, the key.
With the invitation now declined, the lady's conscience is clear. She can now go back to her plans for a more sedate gathering where only people who share her beliefs are invited. And no beer bottles are at risk of being knocked over.
Think of your mind, all the things I have heard in accord with your word. Help me understand.
Did you notice that it was a Bible-trained conscience that helped our sister make a wise decision? She knew what potential danger lay ahead.
Of course, when Geoffrey Jackson says Bible-trained conscience, what he means is Watchtower-trained conscience. Absolutely nowhere in the Bible are you required to spurn office parties or limit your association to only Jehovah's Witnesses. What this music video has illustrated is how little autonomy witnesses have in even the minutiae of life, and how tightly their lives are regulated. The video also showcases the awkward combination of unbridled cheesiness with unabashed fear-mongering, so fast becoming the hallmark of JW Broadcasting propaganda.
The theme for our program this month is Treasure Jehovah's Reminders.
At this point, I owe viewers of my channel an apology. At the beginning of the previous JW Broadcasting rebuttal, number 31, I informed the audience that the governing body helper did not have his name announced in a caption, the kind of caption we have now just seen for Geoffrey Jackson. I reached this conclusion after watching the first few minutes again and again, each time failing to spot the caption. It turned out that the caption finally appeared 5 minutes into the video, revealing the helper's name to be Patrick LaFranca. In this latest episode, the caption showing Geoffrey Jackson's name doesn't appear until 10 minutes into the video. Apparently this is because Watchtower wants the captions to appear at the beginning of the talk segments so that these can be more easily packaged off as standalone videos, regardless of how late the talk begins in the JW Broadcasting episode. I find all this astonishingly pedantic, but needless to say, I still jumped the gun in postulating that the name was withheld to avoid unwanted attention for governing body helpers, and I apologise.
Reminders have always been an essential part of Jehovah's teaching. In ancient Israel, God's people continually received commandments, regulations, and reminders. In fact, Jehovah tells us that he sent his prophets again and again to repeatedly remind his people of their responsibilities.
I suppose one problem that might arise from Jehovah communicating his commandments, regulations, and reminders through prophets is that just about anyone can falsely claim to be a prophet in the hopes of gaining respect and prominence. How are we to know whether a prophet really represents Jehovah or is a fake? Fortunately, Deuteronomy 18:20-22 includes the following helpful guidance. If any prophet presumptuously speaks a word in my name that I did not command him to speak, or speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet must die. However, you may say in your heart, how will we know that Jehovah has not spoken the word? When the prophet speaks in the name of Jehovah, and the word is not fulfilled or does not come true, then Jehovah did not speak that word. The prophet spoke it presumptuously. You should not fear him. Can you think of any person or group of persons who have prophesied in the name of Jehovah things that did not come true?
So Peter was determined to help the brothers and sisters in his day to remember or recall the teachings they'd already learned. It shouldn't come as a surprise then if today a lot of our teaching involves reminders. It follows the patterns set by Jehovah in ancient Israel and with the first century Christians. But why do we need reminders? Let's consider 3 reasons.
I can give you one reason if you like, and it's the same reason that I gave in, I believe, one of my last rebuttals, and that's that when you're in a cult and you're being asked to believe things that are basically nonsense, the only way that you can bring yourself to believe those things is by having it pummeled into you week in, week out, by constantly being reminded of what it is you are supposed to believe in order to secure your survival past Armageddon. In no other aspect of life do you need to be reminded on a weekly basis of what your opinions are. But that's precisely how religion works. To believe in things that make no sense at all, you need repetition. That's the basic reason, the real reason. But we're now going to get a summary of the 3 reasons that Geoffrey Jackson has to offer us.
1, because we tend to forget things. 2, we often become distracted. 3, our changed circumstances may require a reminder of something we already knew but didn't fully need at that time.
Play back those 3 reasons and you will find that they are all essentially the same reason explained slightly differently. So the first reason is we tend to forget things. That's why we need all these reminders, because we're forgetful. The second reason is we might get distracted. Well, that's the same as the first reason. The first reason being we tend to forget things. If you need to be reminded about something because you were distracted, that means you've forgotten it. And the third reason is that our circumstances might change so that we might need reminding of something that we knew already, but we didn't have any practical use for that information, which is the same as basically the first point, namely the fact that we forget things. This alone is a perfect example of the patronizing, overly simplistic way that the governing body conveys information to Jehovah's Witnesses, trying to make things sound more complicated than they need to be. And if you want even more examples of farcical, nonsensical, condescending reasoning from the governing body, here is some more of the reasoning that Geoffrey Jackson used in his 3 points.
And who of us hasn't seen the need for a list of reminders when going shopping, only to realize when we return that we forgot to get one of the important items we needed to purchase?
Of course, if you forget something while you're out shopping, the worst thing that can happen is that when you get home, you realise what's happened, which is very frustrating, and then you have to go back to the shop to buy the thing that you've forgotten. That's the worst that can happen. If, on the other hand, you forget one of the governing body's reminders, the worst that can happen is that you end up disfellowshipped with your family not talking to you.
Satan is the great distractor. He tries to turn our attention away from the true issues of our day. People in general have become more and more distracted by entertainment and other non-essential matters. No wonder that Satan has succeeded in misleading so many. They don't even realize what has happened.
Stupid fools who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses. Stupid gullible fools who are distracted by entertainment and other non-essential things. What's really essential is recognising the authority of a bunch of blokes in New York who are spokespersons for the Almighty. And if you don't believe that, well, you've just been misled by Satan, haven't you?
At Numbers chapter 10, verse 10, we're told that the various festivals were given as reminders, especially the celebration of the Passover. That means that every time the Israelites prepared and celebrated one of these festivals, they were reminded of important matters.
In the case of the Passover celebration, the Israelites were reminded of that time God slaughtered a whole bunch of children in Egypt as punishment for a Pharaoh whose heart he had hardened against letting his people go. The deaths of all those Egyptian children were not in vain, however, because once released, the Israelites then crossed the Red Sea, where the vast majority of them, apart from Joshua, Caleb, and a few Levites, then died in the desert.
Just to listen or read without meditating is like looking through the lens of a movie camera without pressing the record button. We see things and hear things, but nothing is recorded. So we need to meditate, visualize, and review these reminders. This will help us to remember what we learn.
Especially now that I'm awakened from my indoctrination, I find the whole focus on meditation to be one of the most clever things that the governing body does when it comes to making witnesses work and keeping them busy and giving them very challenging tasks that they'll never quite measure up to. Because, what is meditation? To what extent can it be said that one has successfully meditated on something? What target is there that you can, what box is there to check when you're meditating? It's not something that's quantifiable. It's just something that Watchtower can continually say to witnesses to make them feel bad about not quite doing enough. But when it all boils down to it, meditation is only worthwhile when you have something meaningful to meditate on. And by urging witnesses to meditate on their literature and on their understanding of the Bible, they are just assuming that that's what people should be focusing on. But meditation, as I've said, what's the point of meditating on total nonsense? You can have the most ridiculous piece of text in the world and tell someone that they need to meditate on it, but that doesn't mean that doing so is worthwhile. And just to illustrate, I have with me, I'm not calling this a meaningless text by any means, but this is Alice in Wonderland. And there's no particular reason I've picked Alice in Wonderland. I'm just picking a children's book, just to highlight how this whole idea of meditation. Let's meditate on one paragraph of Alice in Wonderland. The White Rabbit returns. There was a pattering of feet in the distance. Alice dried her eyes and saw the White Rabbit once again. So let's meditate on that for a moment, shall we? Alice needed to dry her eyes. So she was crying. She must have been emotionally very distraught. And this was after seeing the White Rabbit. So if she was crying on seeing the White Rabbit, she must have been pleased to see the white rabbit. She must have had an emotional connection with the white rabbit. We're meditating on this now. We're really getting into the nitty-gritty of it. He, that's the white rabbit, was carrying a fan and a pair of white gloves. What does that mean? What could it mean? The rabbit was carrying a fan and a pair of white gloves. Were the white gloves for him? How would the rabbit get his little paws into the white gloves? What use would he have for the fan? Let's read on. And muttering, "Oh, the Duchess, oh, the Duchess. Won't she be cross if I've kept her waiting? Who is this Duchess? Why is the rabbit seemingly working for her? And what is the rabbit doing talking in the first place?" You see, this is just make-believe nonsense. Arguably one of the most kind of outlandish stories ever dreamed up for children, Alice in Wonderland. And you can still meditate on it. You can, if you want, spend hours meditating on each and every paragraph of this book. Doesn't make any of it true. Doesn't give any of it any true meaning or any great application, any profound application in our lives. But it's still something that you can meditate on if you want. And my point of doing all that was to show you, if you happen to be a Jehovah's Witness watching this, that you shouldn't feel bad if you don't square up with the governing body's expectations in this regard. Because if they want you to meditate on their literature, on their understanding of the Bible, they first need to prove to you why that is important. Never feel bad about not sufficiently meditating on make-believe.
Write down new things we want to remember. Some brothers use a notebook or exercise book to write down a list of interesting points that they want to remember. Then they look through the book from time to time to remind themselves of those points. Many of us do this with our notes from conventions and assemblies.
Note-taking at conventions and assemblies had to be one of the most tedious and pointless exercises as a JW. If you were not furiously scribbling down notes on a pad, you were conscious of people perceiving you as not taking full advantage of the spiritual banquet. If you did decide to take notes, you did so knowing full well that it was very unlikely you would ever find time to read your notes once the assembly or convention was over. There was also the dilemma of deciding what to write down and what to leave out. To Jackson's credit, he makes a point of telling witnesses later on in this episode that they shouldn't write down every single word. Even so, with so much importance and reverence attached to these events, it can be really hard for JWs to figure out what bits of information need to be recorded, and ultimately the whole ritual seems designed to keep followers busy and add undue significance to what, when it all boils down to it, is just the same old stuff being trotted out year after year.
It can be frustrating when a new edition of the Bible comes out. How do you transfer all your study notes over to the new Bible? Additionally, our beloved study Bible may wear out, or worse still, be lost, stolen, burned, ruined, run over, blown away. So that's the advantage of using an electronic list. It doesn't matter what type of file you use, it can be updated very easily.
I'm sure there are lots of things that someone like Geoffrey Jackson could talk about in a JW Broadcasting episode, in a video that's going to be broadcast to millions of witnesses worldwide. There are any number of really pressing issues that people have, whether it's dealing with disfellowshipped family members who they're expected to shun, whether it's answering workmates or people they meet on the ministry who challenge them about child abuse. There are any number of pressing issues that it would be appropriate for a governing body member to address before millions of Jehovah's Witnesses. And the most pressing issue, or one of the most pressing issues that Geoffrey Jackson can think of to talk to Jehovah's Witnesses about, is study notes. is how to manage the notes you make in your Bible. If you need to transfer to a new edition of the Bible, or how to manage your study notes in electronic form. This, in the mind of Geoffrey Jackson, is what really needs to be talked about. Now, you may think I'm being picky and leaping on Geoffrey Jackson on the one time that he's said something that isn't that relevant, but actually, let's watch the rest of the video and you'll see what I mean. This is by no means the only part in the May 2017 JW Broadcasting episode where Geoffrey Jackson indulges in wasting time on total trivia.
In this dramatization, pay attention to how we should respond to counsel.
But after the meeting tonight, my feelings were hurt. Earlier in the week, we invited some friends over to watch a movie. And apparently, this new young elder heard about it. So he counseled me about it after the meeting, saying I should give my movie choices some thought. I just didn't like the way he gave the counsel. He's only 27. That's too young.
If you're watching this as a non-JW, you might be shocked that a JW elder would have the audacity to counsel a member of the congregation about his movie choices. But as we are to learn as this dramatization unfolds, this behaviour is not considered wrong or abnormal among JWs. The truth is, this is the level to which witnesses have their lives micromanaged by their leaders. If word gets out that they've been watching entertainment that the governing body would consider inappropriate, a witness can expect a tap on the shoulder at the meeting. The only area of ambiguity in this dramatisation is whether the young elder overstepped the mark in the way he delivered the counsel. Thankfully, however, an experienced older elder is about to intervene and soften the blow.
I can understand how you might feel. But Byung-soo, be absolutely honest with me. Do you feel there is no valid reason for that counsel?
Well, maybe there were some scenes that could have been less violent.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. If you happen to be watching this as someone who doesn't know much about Jehovah's Witnesses, it's always good to know these things. It's good to know that you can't be a Jehovah's Witness and watch films with gunshots and screaming.
Byung-soo, what is the only way for us to receive perfect counsel?
From a perfect man?
That's right. And is Jesus here on the earth today?
He was right. Counsel can only be perfect if it's given from a perfect person.
This is an argument commonly employed by the governing body as a means of brushing off their mistakes. They argue that they are neither perfect nor infallible, so it would be unreasonable to expect too much from them. However, as I have argued in previous videos, this argument only holds up for those who are not excessive in making demands of others. If you are a religious leader and you are in the business of covering up your own mistakes while ruthlessly punishing the mistakes of others by exiling them from their loved ones, you cannot expect to be taken seriously when you shrug off your own mistakes as the product of imperfection.
I later shared Brother Kang's comments with my wife. We both realized we should welcome all counsel from Jehovah. It's for our good.
Former witnesses watching this might remember themselves having to throw out CDs or videos due to pressure either from parents or elders to purge themselves of anything that might be considered violent, obscene or sexually explicit. This again highlights perfectly the level of control to which witnesses are subjected. If there is the slightest risk of fellow believers being shocked or stumbled by your choice of entertainment, as a loyal witness, you are expected to reach for the trash can.
I'm sure it took courage for that young elder to approach me about the matter.
Actually, I'm not so sure about that. Don't get me wrong, there are sometimes occasions when you need to confront someone about something or correct their behaviour in some way. And yes, sometimes doing this can require courage, especially when you're standing up to an authority figure. But simply telling someone they're doing something wrong does not require courage in and of itself. Sometimes all you need is for the person in question to be a self-important, sanctimonious, judgmental git.
But I'm so glad he did, because in the end, his counsel was just another example of God's love.
Yes, we all need reminders.
In this case, I'm reminded of the fact that you can't be a Jehovah's Witness unless you're willing to have your life micromanaged to the extent where you can't watch certain films without being told off by your elders.
And did you notice some of the main teaching points in this dramatization? First, we need to be humble when we receive counsel.
Talk of the need for humility would be much easier to stomach coming from someone who isn't a governing body member. The governing body has built a reputation for never issuing sincere, heartfelt, unconditional apologies, even when they are proven to be in error. For example, when they predict the end to come in a timescale that later ends up being revised or scrapped altogether. Geoffrey Jackson's own testimony at the Australian Royal Commission in 2015 was a stunning example of pride and defiance, even in the face of overwhelming evidence of serious failings when it comes to Watchtower's track record with child safeguarding. Rather than honestly admit their failings and seek to make amends, with the safety of countless children at stake, governing body members either stick their heads in the sand or go as far as to say that there is no problem, or even suggest that they have an excellent reputation when it comes to dealing with child abuse.
While we cannot control everything that an individual might say, it is clear that over the decades, protecting children from abuse is a top priority for this organization. We are proud of our reputation in this regard.
There are lots of words I could use to describe such behaviour, but humility is not one of them.
Second, we need to keep our focus on the counsel, not the counselor.
How convenient. Focus on the counsel, not the counsellor. That way, if the counsellor happens to be corrupt or hypocritical, he can continue wielding power without ever having his authority questioned or challenged.
So we have a ton of work and a lot of challenges. But I'm also working with a lot of very, very talented brothers and sisters. So it's a lot of fun and it's great going to work every day.
That's great to hear, Pierre. In fact, I'm even tempted to come back and work with you.
Oh, we would love that.
I think I'd love it too.
So this is a rather awkward part in which Geoffrey Jackson interviews three of the men who are on the team for developing the JW Library app, which apparently is of pressing importance for witnesses to be kept updated. And it's just a really cringeworthy segment of the broadcasting episode because there's so much about it that's contrived, that's forced, that's feigned. And in particular, you see this feigned camaraderie between Geoffrey Jackson and the people he's talking to, as though they're all great mates, as though they're all equals and they could all just go for a beer if they all wanted to. Really kind of almost deliberately put there to disguise the fact that there is this huge disparity between them. One of them is a spokesperson for the Almighty, or at least one of the spokespersons for the Almighty, and the others are really just a bunch of guys who work for Geoffrey Jackson and his colleagues. As difficult as it is to watch, though, I'm glad in a way that this is included, because it's difficult to disguise when people are being artificial, when people are forcing it for the camera. It's very difficult to mask that. And I'm glad that the governing body are going down this route of basically acting, of putting on a show for the camera, because that's something that Jehovah's Witnesses will pick up on.
Very good. Well, now all of you work in MEPS programming. Pierre, can you just tell us a little bit? We're familiar with the term MEPS, but what really is it?
Well, MEPS stands for Multi-Language Electronic Publishing System.
That didn't help me at all. Sorry. Can you make it a little bit more simpler so we can understand?
We make the tools or the programs that the organization needs to make publications and have them translated into hundreds of languages. So I can illustrate it this way, that we are not making the spiritual food, but we are building a conveyor belt for the spiritual food, from the faithful and discreet slave and down to the printing presses, or to our website, or to Watchtower Library, online library, or, like in this case, JW Library.
Thanks so much. Now, at long last, I do understand a bit more about what MEPS means.
Nobody is telling me that Geoffrey Jackson, a governing body member with direct experience of translating Watchtower materials, is unaware of what MEPS is. Jackson would be no use as a Bethelite, let alone a governing body member, if after so many years at Watchtower's Nerve Centre participating in translation, he was still unaware of the specialist system Watchtower has developed to quickly format each of their publications into various languages. Doubtless many witnesses will chuckle along at the feigned ignorance, but I find it unsettling. Jackson is here putting on a performance for the camera, which begs the question, how much of his role as 1/7 of the faithful and discreet slave is also a performance?
Also very important to us is trying to make each new feature very simple to use.
Thanks for doing that.
Especially for a first-time user, someone who's never used the app before. And then, of course, before we start working on anything, we always get approval from the governing body.
That's a good thing to do too.
Yes, approval from the governing body is crucial. If they get to control what parties witnesses can attend and what entertainment they can enjoy, they surely need to have the final say in how the organization's official apps are designed.
Like one feature that many have been asking for is the ability to add notes into the app. And of course, before we start programming it, we have to make sure that it actually does what is wanted. And we made a video that shows how we go about that. Would you like to see it?
Well, of course, I'd love to see it.
Again, I hope I'm not the only one who finds Jackson's over-the-top performance unnerving. Nobody can blame him for hamming it up a little for the camera. The simple truth is you need to inject a bit of energy when you're staring into a lens. Otherwise, the end product can be very dull and difficult to watch. But Jackson isn't just some talk show presenter or YouTuber. He is a spiritual leader, supposedly part of the collective mouthpiece of Jehovah on earth. While you wouldn't expect him to be solemn or overly pious, the feigned excitement is at best distracting and at worst hints at superficiality that runs much deeper. It's also worth reminding ourselves that this is an app Jackson is getting all excited about. An app. Where was all this energy when Jackson was summoned by the Australian Royal Commission back in 2015? Where was this level of interest in the plight of victims of child abuse, victims whose testimony he had neglected to examine despite somehow finding the time to thoroughly acquaint himself with what his fellow Watchtower officials had told the Commission?
Hello, how are you?
Good.
Welcome, thanks for coming.
Yourself?
Fine, thank you. Have a seat. All right, so glad you could be here. you so much.
Ooh, it's all fancy.
Yeah, so we get to talk about JW Library today. So what are some ways that you use JW Library?
No, this is not a parody. This is not a spoof. This is a real video that's been included in the JW Broadcasting episode to show a team of Jehovah's Witnesses who've been assembled to give feedback on the JW Library app. Again, the JW Library app has been decided to be one of the most pressing issues that Jehovah's Witnesses around the world need to be updated on. And to help highlight this, they've put together this video with quirky music, basically a tech ad. They've included a tech ad in the JW Broadcasting episode to highlight how cool the JW Library app is. But it goes back to what I was saying before about fakeness and including acting and obviously contrived material in the episodes. As far as I'm concerned, that's something that will not appeal to everybody. These Jehovah's Witnesses who are pretending for the camera to be excited about something that's essentially just an app to help them study.
I mean, it's revolutionized going to meetings.
I go to meetings sometimes and I just carry my iPad.
The simple fact that you can make the text larger.
It's easy to listen to the readings right in the app now, and so I find myself doing that.
So if we were to make a notes feature, what are some things that you'd like to be able to do?
I mean, if you could see all your notes without tapping on each one, that would be great.
And even if you make a note in maybe your phone, and that it can also be saved in your tablet, that would be really nice.
Yeah. Well, what if I told you that in front of you is an early version of JW Library.
This is it?
With notes, yeah. So a few months ago, the governing body gave us approval to start working on the notes feature. We got together as a team and we'll do like these rough sketches and the programmers write code. But before we release an update, we have a group of testers. You know, they'll find little glitches or bugs or things, but they'll try to work it out with the programmers. After that, we have a pretty stable version of JW Library. The goal is to show it to you, and you can let us know what you think. So now that you've seen the new notes feature in JW Library, what do you think?
I love that I can tag the personal things that I need to work on, or a comment or a scripture that I can encourage someone with. This is fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
I like that I can find my notes, especially using the search feature. It's great.
And it's really neat how my comments, I can place it right next to the paragraph for meetings and it doesn't cover the actual text.
Yeah.
The ability to back it up so you can restore it to another device, that's going to be really helpful.
I love it. Amazing.
Okay, go ahead.
They're telling us we can pursue.
This is a world away from the organisation that I grew up in, the religion that I remember, not just as a child, but right up to sort of 2010, 2011 when I stopped going to meetings. I don't recognise this anymore. This is a self-indulgent, bloated organisation that thinks it's Apple, that thinks that we're all impressed by adverts, self-congratulatory adverts about new apps. They honestly seem to think that this is going to excite the audience. I'm sure that there will be people in the audience who will be cooing in the same way as those people on the video. But I was just watching it thinking, what has this organisation become? This is spiritual food about spiritual food. We've gone past the stage where Watchtower feels it needs to create material and content about the Bible, and it's now creating material and content about the material and content that it makes about the Bible. We've seen it before with videos where it does making of videos, like the one it did for the Philippines video, where it showed behind the scenes how it put together this propaganda video that exploited this huge tragedy in which many witnesses died. And they were letting us in on the secret of how they put this video together. Well, this in my view is even more tiresome and self-indulgent. They honestly are impressed with their ability to create apps and think that that itself will sustain the interest of the JW Broadcasting audience. I'm not excited about this kind of material. I can't imagine that even Jehovah's Witnesses who use JW Library will be ecstatic about sitting through that sort of cringeworthy spectacle, but there is one person who's over the moon about the whole thing.
That's fantastic. But brothers, you can't show us something like that and not tell us when we're going to get it.
Well, we said on the website it was coming soon.
I know you said that on the website, but when?
Is it okay to be more specific than that?
I think that's why they invited us here.
Paul, let's hear it.
Well, we're happy to tell you that the notes feature in JW Library will be coming soon. And by soon, we mean during May of 2017, this month. So we can go and check the app stores for an update.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. So all of us will be happy to be able to put our own reminders right there in the JW Library app.
Again, I hope I'm not the only one who's picking up on the intense fakeness and superficiality of Geoffrey Jackson's responses to all of this. I mean, I understand, when you're doing a video, to a certain degree you have to play for the camera, but it does just feel very odd to see someone behaving in this way, pretending to be excited about things, who also claims to sincerely be a spokesperson for God.
But now, while I've got you here, we're not going to let you go until we ask this big question. What are you working on now? In other words, what can we expect to see soon with JW Library?
We have another brief video showing what the team is working on to support the study Bible on JW Library app. Would you like to see it?
That's wonderful. Let's have a look.
Later this year, work will begin on adding the study edition of the New World Translation to JW Library.
That's right, in this JW Broadcasting episode, the governing body has seen fit to give us not just one tech ad, but two. Jehovah's Witnesses need to know about the study edition of the New World Translation being added to the JW Library app.
All of this and more is coming soon to JW Library.
That sounds so exciting.
I'm so excited, and I just can't hide it.
And speaking of behind the scenes, do you remember the beautiful dramas we had at the regional convention last year?
Who could forget? There was the drama that was supposed to be a modern day version of Job, in which Jehovah's Witness man named Ethan loses his father and his young son, and his grief and bereavement is hijacked as a tool to keep him as a loyal Jehovah's Witness. And then there was the other drama in which the Bible account of Hezekiah was recreated so that it was stated to be a historical fact that 185,000 Assyrian soldiers were killed by an angel. Thankfully, going back to what I said earlier, the governing body has established that there is a pressing need in the field for Jehovah's Witnesses to be shown how these drama videos were made. So yes, now we're going to be treated to yet another behind the scenes video, which instead of being about the Bible, is about how spiritual food about the Bible is made.
Our work was driven by the Bible account. The audience needed to feel the intimidating power of the Assyrian army while not endangering our actors. And the use of visual effects had the added benefit of drastically saving donated funds.
Of course, another way of saving donated funds would be to stop covering up child abuse and bring the organisation's safeguarding policies in line with basic requirements for child protection. That way, the organisation will stop hemorrhaging cash through expensive settlements and legal fines.
Our research team ensured the world created was as accurate as possible. For example, having period-correct materials for the temple, as well as accurate stone reliefs. After filming was complete, the research team noted some scenes in the treasury were accidentally shot showing priests wearing sandals. As this was inaccurate, the issue was corrected by generating additional digital treasures and placing them in the foreground.
Watchtower is here trying to impress us with their attention to detail and commitment to accuracy when publications and video materials are being prepared. Similar assurance can be found on page 15 of the 2011 yearbook, where we are told, in summary, the writing department insists on using only material that is accurate and truthful, even regarding seemingly insignificant details. As a result, the faithful and discreet slave can consistently supply spiritual food that brings honor to the God of truth, Jehovah. The truth is that when you scrutinize Watchtower publications in any detail, you find them to be strewn with supposition, misquotes, and outright fabrications. A recent example was the January 2015 Awake titled How Did Life Begin?, which originally began with a quote by Professor Rama Singh apparently questioning the credibility of evolution among scientists. But when Singh's quote was read in context, far from casting doubt on evolution, it was actually bemoaning the general ignorance of people on the subject and arguing strongly in favour of better educating people about how evolution by natural selection works. When the misquote was exposed, rather than print an apology for the brazen attempt at distorting Singh's words, Watchtower simply erased that paragraph from the online versions of the magazine, which is why you will no longer see the quote on jw.org. If you want to see even more examples of Watchtower materials deliberately misquoting and disseminating false information, check out the jwfacts.com page titled Misquotes, Deception and Lies.
As we didn't have the luxury of 185,000 extras, actors were dressed in ancient costumes and their pictures taken. We then used these pictures to create digital extras, using crowd simulating software to place them in the scenes and drive their movements.
How ironic that a digital depiction of a Bible account that is itself clearly exaggerated, so that an angel is reported to slay 185,000 soldiers, must exaggerate the numbers of people involved in the production. By the way, if you haven't already done so, please check out episode 4 of my Worst Convention Ever series of videos, in which I closely examine Watchtower's version of the story of Hezekiah and compare it with what we know about the period in question based on archaeology and recorded history.
The angel shot proved to be one of the most challenging. The original version didn't have the dramatic feel needed for the scene. So the entire sequence was recreated to more accurately convey the immense power those present must have witnessed.
Only there is no evidence of anyone witnessing an angel wiping out 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. You would think that such a remarkable event would leave behind some kind of archaeological evidence, perhaps a mass grave just outside Jerusalem, where the bodies of 185,000 soldiers, identifiable with this period in history, were dumped. But there is no archaeological evidence, and no evidence in contemporaneous records either. But even if we ignore the lack of evidence and accept this Bible account as true, we are then left with some difficult questions to answer. If one angel has the power to kill 185,000 humans, why was Lot so anxious to protect 2 angels that visited his home from a crazed mob that he went so far as to offer his daughters to be gang raped rather than allow any harm to befall his guests? And if a single angel can selectively wipe out such a breathtaking number of people, why was it necessary for Noah to construct an ark to save his family and 2 of every kind of animal? As I argued in the last JW Broadcasting rebuttal, why did God insist on orchestrating an implausible, physically impossible melodrama when he could have snapped his fingers and killed every human apart from Noah and his family without a single drop falling to the earth? The answer, of course, is that the flood didn't happen, and neither did the slaying of 185,000 Assyrian soldiers by an angel. These far-fetched legends are just a great example of how quickly fabricated stories and made-up fantasies start to unravel when those writing them get a bit too carried away.
Finishing this project on schedule had many challenges. After hearing about just a few of them, one industry expert said what we were attempting was impossible. But like Hezekiah, when hearing negative reports, we stayed positive and relied on Jehovah. With his help, the film was completed on time and is now a wonderful tool to bring this Bible account to life.
This part just sounded a bit too familiar to me. The industry expert, who is unnamed, we don't know who he is, but he's cited basically as a reason why it could only have been done with Jehovah's help. This unnamed industry expert is invoked, who says that he can't understand how it could have been done. It got me to thinking, I'm sure there are other times, or there's at least one other time, when Watchtower has done this, has pulled this trick of invoking the industry experts. And I got to thinking, when was it? When did they do it? And then I realised that it was in the very first JW Broadcasting episode, the October 2014 episode, which I made my very first rebuttal video about, but because it was back in the early days before I was figuring out how to do all the video editing, I actually never showed any of the actual footage from that rebuttal. So here at long last is some of the footage from the very first JW Broadcasting episode, the October 2014 episode, and listen out for how the industry expert is invoked as evidence that only God could be behind the project.
We asked an industry professional how long it would normally take to complete a studio and project of this size. He said without hesitating, at least 1.5 years. Yet our hard-working brothers and sisters accomplished this monumental task in just 2 months. This just emphasizes the fact that when Jehovah wants something done, there is nothing that can stop him.
And this was really the first time that we saw Watchtower in JW Broadcasting episodes. Well, I say the first time, it was right from the get-go that they started claiming Jehovah's hand for doing things that were fairly mundane. They started trying to give Jehovah's Witnesses the impression that only with Jehovah's help could they pull something off. And how clever that the industry expert or the industry professional never gets named. So he can't be asked, by anyone else whether that's really what he thinks. But I look at both the Hezekiah video, don't get me wrong, it looks like it was quite a sophisticated production. It's certainly the biggest use of green screen that I've seen, probably in any cult, but certainly with Watchtower. And the JW Broadcasting studio as well. It took a lot of work to put together, but I can't see how you can point to achievements like that and say it could only be accomplished in a short time scale with Jehovah's hand. And to illustrate how this doesn't make sense even according to Watchtower's own material, I'm going to show you now some footage from the latest Gilead graduation video, because bear in mind, we just saw the October 2014 episode where they said, there's no way that under normal circumstances that we would get a studio built in such a short space of time. Well, look at the latest Gilead graduation video in which they make an actual studio, a talk show studio, just for interviewing the Gilead graduates. Take a look.
What's the format of this new segment?
You're going to love it. A talk show.
A talk show?
A talk show.
It means, though, you're going to have to build a set. You're going to have lighting.
What about if they can sing, or there's musical instruments that they can play? We'll need a little spot for them to actually perform a song.
I'm thinking, though, if it's going to be a show, it's
What are you
got to
thinking?
have a name. You
Make
ready?
it unique.
Okay. The Inside Story.
Ken.
Because you're getting
It resonates.
You're getting the
I
inside
love
story.
it. The inside story. Let's go with that.
Okay. But Mark, we are weeks away from Gilead
I know.
graduation.
We'll have to work hard to pull this off.
Do you think we can get this done in time?
Let's see.
Friends, you are in for a real treat. I'm here with the whole class of Gilead, and they've gotten together to get better acquainted with some of their classmates. And we have been invited to this occasion. You are going to meet some lovable brothers and sisters. And we have a band. They're going to perform an original song composed by one of your classmates. And the song is entitled Pronto será realidad. In English, that means soon it will be a reality. Let's listen to Pronto será realidad.
Otro color, quiero estar donde el dolor es imposible, donde el mar tiene sabor a libertad.
Oh, sorry. I got a bit carried away there. Anyway, as I was saying, you can't make a video in October 2014 praising your ability to make a new studio and saying that this feat could only have been accomplished with Jehovah's involvement, and then pull off the exact same stunt just a few years later, again in just a few weeks, for some trivial Gilead graduation where you want to basically produce a gimmick. You want to do something, rather than having the Gilead graduates on the stage, you want to, just for a laugh, build a talk show studio. You've just proven how easy it is to put a studio together on a short deadline when you really want it to happen, and when you have no end of cult volunteers who are willing to give of their time and energy freely to see it come to fruition. Exactly the same applies to the Hezekiah video. Yes, it was very impressive, all of the green screen effects and the digital animation and all of that kind of thing, but it wasn't impossible by any stretch. And you can't make it sound impossible just by invoking some unnamed industry expert that nobody has the opportunity to speak to themselves.
The 2016 Regional Convention was excellent, don't you agree?
No, I don't agree. In fact, so strongly do I disagree with your suggestion that the 2016 Regional Convention series was excellent that I produced a 9-part series about it titled The Worst Convention Ever. This convention featured propaganda coercing witnesses to shun their disfellowshipped children, to die rather than accept blood transfusions, to judge other witnesses as worthy of death for not being sufficiently zealous in the ministry, and even to deny children the chance to become professional musicians. None of this, I'm afraid, could be described as excellent.
But you'll be happy to know that we've prepared a little glimpse of what is to come at this year's convention to whet your appetite.
Are you okay?
Brian, I'm worried.
So this is a video, or a series of videos, titled Remember the Wife of Lot. And the style of it, because basically, if you're Jehovah's Witness, you'll go to the convention and you'll see one installment on the Friday, one on the Saturday, and one on the Sunday. And it's put together as though, well, I've heard people describe it as like a sitcom, but I associate sitcoms with humour, with intentional humour. I can only describe it as a soap opera. A really cheap, badly acted, badly scripted, poorly put together soap opera. But the subject or the reason behind it is not entertainment. It's portrayed in that way as though it's supposed to be entertaining to Jehovah's Witnesses. No, it's a piece of propaganda. So it's designed to tell Jehovah's Witnesses how they should behave and how they should be. And right from the get-go, let me say that this is up there with some of the most disturbing videos that Watchtower has produced. I'm already getting asked whether I need to revisit the title I gave last year's convention, whether this new convention is actually now the worst convention ever. I'm not convinced of that. I think that last year's convention was still quite special in the sheer volume of material. But certainly Remember the Wife of Lot is appalling. And when you watch it, it's bad for two reasons. Firstly, it's bad because, again, the acting is so bad. It's like the people they've chosen to portray the characters, it's like they haven't been chosen according to their acting merits at all. They've probably been chosen for reaching some other criteria within the organisation. There is no acting talent on show in this video at all. So if you're like me and you appreciate good acting and you appreciate good films and good storylines and good plots, well thought out, well portrayed characters, you will be squirming through this. You will want your seat to swallow you up. It's really painful to watch, purely from the point of view of the acting. The other thing that's painful to watch is the manipulation. And I say it's painful, but there are positives here, because Watchtower is creating this ideal Jehovah's Witness, or you could say that they've always been creating the ideal Jehovah's Witness. But it's only through these videos that are a relatively recent thing in terms of how much focus Watchtower has put on videos. It's only through these highly produced videos that Watchtower can give form and give shape to what the ideal Jehovah's Witness looks like. And I would argue that they've created a Jehovah's Witness that is unattainable, that is unrecognizable from what most Jehovah's Witnesses will see in themselves. Yes, there are Jehovah's Witnesses who are that zealous and who live their lives to the letter in observing everything Watchtower expects of them. There are those Jehovah's Witnesses. They're not very popular and there aren't very many of them. The majority, I would argue, the majority of Jehovah's Witnesses are just doing their best and they just want to believe. That's all they want. They want to try their best and recognize that they will frequently not do what's expected of them. They will frequently not do their day's text. They will frequently not pray together as a family. They will frequently forget family worship. But just because they've forgotten those things doesn't mean that they don't believe. And I feel as though this massive cloud of witnesses who are the majority are being isolated by this kind of material. This kind of material that's saying to them, no, you really should be trying harder. What you're doing is not good enough. So again, I found it a fascinating video. Check it out for yourself. You can watch it if you go to avoidjw.org and go on the conventions tab. It should be quite easy to track down the videos so that you can download them and watch them at your leisure, if you can sit through them, that is. But I've just prepared a few clips to give you an idea of how cringeworthy this video is. And in this first clip, we're going to see a conversation right near the beginning. And this apparently is the sort of conversation that Watchtower thinks Jehovah's Witnesses have when they finish after the ministry.
Hey, Gloria, you went on service day. How did it go?
Yes, we had a really nice time. I had some nice calls over on the east side of town.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Honestly, that is not how Jehovah's Witnesses talk to each other about the preaching work. Nobody is going to be talking with that much enthusiasm. And the next clip I'm going to show you is similarly unrealistic. We're now going to see what Watchtower thinks a typical worldly person looks like just before they become a witness.
Nobody's honest today, man. Not even my suppliers. If I had it my way, I'd take those guys and I'd give them what they deserve.
Okay, all right.
Yes, Watchtower believes that before they become Jehovah's Witnesses, worldly people are just really, really angry, causing them to bash people's doors when they go round to their houses. Aside from the sloppy, unrealistic construction of the characters, there is a darker element, or actually one or two darker elements to this film. Firstly, there is misogyny. And there's two examples of this misogyny, but the first example I'm going to show you is the stereotypical bickering mother-in-law who is manipulative and constantly in her daughter's ear. Take a look.
You need more money. Not super rich, but just enough to have what our relatives have. Or they'll look down on you.
So the mother-in-law just has to be this evil, conniving woman. It can't be a father-in-law, it has to be the mother-in-law. But that's not all. Take a look at how the Lot's wife character is portrayed. Arguably, the lead character in the video, she is the woman of the family, but she's portrayed as this ill-tempered, shallow, manipulative woman.
We're not taking full advantage of this opportunity.
We need to put the kingdom first.
I am putting kingdom first, but this is the time to think about our future. How many working years do we have left anyway? But if you don't plan ahead, we'll end up living on the street.
You can just tell that the script for this video was written by men. Men who don't particularly have a particularly high esteem for women, and who can very easily and readily bring to mind examples such as the ones we've seen of, again, shallow, ill-tempered, manipulative women, manipulative mother-in-laws. It's all very cliched, it's all very stereotypical, and it's all very misogynistic. On a slightly more humorous note, however, here is another unrealistic example that's shown in the film, this time of a father who returns home from work and basically sits down, tells the family, we're becoming Jehovah's Witnesses, and everyone just goes along with it.
I decided that I want us all to start studying the Bible together.
What? You mean you want to become a priest?
Come on, Rick.
It's Jehovah's Witnesses, isn't it, Dad? I borrowed your book. I liked it.
Well, I think it's a good idea. You know, I really like those people.
All right, so what do you say, boys?
Sure, Dad.
I'm sure that conversation has happened at some time, somewhere in the world, but it's not a normal conversation. Hey, boys, do you fancy joining a cult with me? Sure, Dad, that sounds like a great idea. But unintended comedic elements of the video like that are few and far between. The darker elements of this video are what really stay with you. And arguably there is no darker element to the Remember Lot's Wife video than the following scene that promotes homophobia.
Your parents must be really proud of you. Well, my moms are both really proud of me. I was raised by two wonderful women, you know, life partners.
Oh, yeah, you know, my assistant Marty, I recently found out that he's gay.
You say that like there's something wrong with it. Do you have a problem?
Tess, don't do this.
Why? There's nothing wrong with being gay.
Tess, we live by the Bible's moral standards, but we don't force our beliefs on other people, and we don't judge anyone either. We believe there are standards of right and wrong that we should live by. And God's word says that sex is meant to be between a man and a woman who are married to each other.
Look, I don't mean to be rude, sir, but the world has changed.
Honey,
I don't want to go on about this too much because I'm actually planning to make a separate video just about the homophobic elements of the Remember Lot's Wife video. There is actually another part of the video that has kind of a homophobic element. In that situation, if someone's in your house and you genuinely believe that there is something wrong with homosexuality, and by the way, arguably you need to believe that it's wrong for sinful reasons, or in other words, for theological reasons, rather than for actual reasons, you know, for health reasons or whatever. Anyway, if someone's in that situation and they're in your home saying that they have two moms, there is no need to make a big deal of it. Why do you even need to respond to it? Why do you need to start talking about your friend at work who's gay? Just let it go. There's no need at all to make an issue. But Watchtower clearly wants Jehovah's Witnesses to make an issue of it. We saw it already with the Caleb and Sophia video, where Sophia speaks to her mom about her friend at school who also has two moms, and Sophia's mum basically instructs her to go back and try preaching to this classmate who has two moms to try and persuade her that this is wrong. This is a very distasteful way of dealing with the whole subject. If you personally believe that homosexuality is wrong, guess what? Nobody's asking you to be homosexual. This is purely a case of letting other people live their lives as they see fit. And in this Remember Lot's Wife video, Watchtower is essentially saying to Jehovah's Witnesses, make a big deal of it. Use any opportunity to make either gays or lesbians or people in gay or lesbian families feel terrible. Now though, we have yet another unrealistic portrayal of worldly people, this time of a worldly boss who is apparently some kind of gangster.
You must serve my company and work hard for me. Remember what I've said to you. You could lose all this very easily. Do you understand?
Again, Watchtower is painting a completely unrealistic picture that relies heavily on exaggerations, on a hyperbole, on cliches, to leave witnesses with the impression that the world is out to get them. So worldly bosses are apparently like this. They're not just out to do their own job, to run their own company. They're not just out to, manage you, to, sort out your paycheck, to sort out your work schedule. They also want to own your life and demand above and beyond what can reasonably be expected of you. This is the sort of character, this worldly boss, that can only be written by a Bethelite who spent more or less his entire life working at Watchtower, who just has no clue at all how the business world operates. There are no bosses like this, unless it's in organised crime. So again, just totally cringeworthy the way the whole thing has been put together. I also wanted to find a clip to show you guys just an example of how bad the acting is. I mean, hopefully that's obvious from what you've already seen. Honestly, I was spoiled for choice. But if I had to pick a clip that would illustrate how lazy and amateur and shabby and ill thought out the acting is in this production, I think I would choose this one.
Anna, I am so proud of you. Because you have the courage to do what I should have done.
It's almost as though these actors were coached by someone who themselves doesn't know anything about acting and who was essentially saying to them, well, listen, all you need to do is deliver the lines, but do so with big gaps in the sentence. So long as there are these big gaps in the sentence, it will come across great. It will be totally believable.
Can we at least keep the new piano?
Only if we do something about your hair first.
Good point.
Is there something wrong with my hair? Tina helped me fix it yesterday.
Those are some more clips that I just had to include. Just because you're watching it and you're thinking, what is wrong with the girl's hair? It's kind of referenced a little bit earlier on because she's at work and one of her colleagues compliments her on her hair. So straight away you're thinking, oh, probably if the work colleague is complimenting her on her hair, probably that means that she's got a wrong style of hair. But you're looking at her hair thinking, but there's nothing wrong with it. And then later on, she arrives at the family home for this big emotional conversation in which the family essentially decides that they want to try harder as Jehovah's Witnesses. And all of a sudden she gets turned on and hair shamed because of the style of her hair. And again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the piece about watching the wrong kind of film. I'm glad that this is in. I'm glad that this is included so that people who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses, people watching this, or people who attend the convention because they want to know more about Jehovah's Witnesses, those sorts of people can see for themselves the level of control that is exerted on Jehovah's Witnesses. You're not even allowed to decide for yourself what kind of hairstyle you have. Also cringeworthy in this production were the continuous, not so subtle nods towards salt. And if you know the story of Lot's wife, you know that Lot's wife is executed by God by being turned into a pillar of salt. So take a look at how Watchtower decides to reference this aspect of the story. Probably whoever was behind this video was immensely pleased with themselves for managing to get salt into some of the earlier scenes in the series of videos. I just found it incredibly odd and distasteful because we're talking, I mean, if you believe the story to be true, we're talking about a woman's death. We're talking about a woman's life being ended by the molecules in her body being turned into salt crystals. I mean, if someone is hanged, if someone is executed by being hanged in a noose, you don't include in a modern reenactment of the story, you don't include close-ups of a rope cord, do you? It would just be grotesque and crass. But for some reason, because it's salt, because it's crystals, because it's slightly harder to imagine someone turning to salt, well, that's okay. We'll include these little references. But all of that pales into insignificance compared to the actual scene in the video where the character who is basically portraying Lot's wife is shown in the mirror turning to salt. And just to give you some backstory, when this scene is shown in the video, there is some uncertainty as to whether she will be attending the memorial because she's allowed herself to get swept along in this real estate job under the employ of her uncle, who also seems to think he's some kind of gangster. And there is some uncertainty, although she realizes that she needs to break off from her job, there is some uncertainty as to whether she will actually make it to the memorial because she's supposed to be entertaining some clients on the same evening. So she has this dilemma, and that's when the salt scene is shown.
Promise me you'll be at the memorial.
I promise.
Mom, don't look back. Remember the wife of Lot.
Remember the wife of Lot. What's wrong?
If, like me, you find that last scene to be a grotesque example of fear-mongering and manipulation, you might be interested to know that this film is by no means the first time Watchtower has revelled in the hypothetical terror and distress experienced by Lot's wife when she had her molecules turned to salt crystals as a divine punishment. These are images from a children's cartoon that is still downloadable from jw.org, in which the same scene is depicted with gratuitous gore and savagery. Apparently, the governing body loves the idea of people being executed in this slow, painful manner, and wants to remind Jehovah's Witnesses, including children, that any who fail to give them the respect they feel they are owed can expect a similar fate. It's also worth just pointing out a couple of things about the Bible story of Lot's wife. First of all, it's very telling that despite being a well-known Bible character with a compelling story that is familiar to many, Lot's wife is given no name in the Bible. All we know about her is that she supposedly had undesirable qualities and she wasn't a man. You have to wonder why her name was omitted and whether the character would have undergone the same indignity of not being named by the Bible writers if they had instead invented her as a male, something I don't think they would have done because the whole point seems to have been to portray women as fickle, skittish, superficial and beholden to the authority of men. Secondly, what moral lesson do we derive from the story? The lesson appears to be that death is a worthy penalty for disobedience, even in the case of a relatively minor infraction, such as looking in the wrong direction when instructed otherwise. You could argue, if you like, that Lot's wife deserved to die by being turned into a pillar of salt because she had been specifically warned by the angels not to look back at the city as it was being destroyed. But was it really necessary to not just end her life for this momentary slip-up, but to do so in a way that could very well have caused distress and excruciating pain as depicted in the cartoons we've just considered? What if Lot's wife had been allowed to live and later expressed repentance for looking back? Where was the mercy on the part of the angels? How does her instant and gratuitously violent execution square with the constant appeals for mercy and forgiveness that we find spilling from the lips of Jesus in the New Testament? Of course, I don't believe this story ever happened. When you research the Bible objectively, you find that the events described in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, are entirely without historical or archaeological basis. But even if we were to look at the account as a guide for instilling morals in people, the story of Lot is absolutely appalling, and the less we elevate it as a framework for morality, the better. To put it another way, imagine you had 2 people. One disobeyed an arbitrary rule by looking in the wrong direction in a moment of stress and trauma. The other offered up his 2 girls to be gang raped rather than see any harm befall his able-bodied guests, and later impregnated those same daughters while under the influence of alcohol. Which of these 2 characters was, in your view, the most reprehensible? And yet the Bible would have us believe that Lot was the more moral of the 2, or at least less deserving of death than his wife.
If you have yet to make definite plans to attend your regional convention this year, don't delay.
Thanks very much, Geoffrey. How about I get back to you on that?
Our conventions are a loving provision from Jehovah. Whatever it takes, talking to your boss to get time off work or making travel plans, yes, whatever it takes, our efforts are worth it because we truly treasure Jehovah's reminders.
Whatever it takes, Jehovah's Witnesses should get themselves to the convention. And this may seem like just a petty point that I'm raising, but I think you need to have spent time as a Jehovah's Witness to understand what he's saying here. He's referencing arranging time with employers, I know of examples of Jehovah's Witnesses who have walked out on their jobs because their employer hasn't given them time off. Bear in mind the conventions are held Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and if you work full time, you're going to normally be expected to work on the Friday at least. So that's the level of sacrifice Watchtower demands of Jehovah's Witnesses. They need to be there for all 3 days, and if that means walking out on their jobs, well, that's fine.
How does the organization help our brothers and sisters in times of national crisis? We met 2 witness couples who personally experienced 2 of the largest terrorist attacks in recent years.
September 11th was a very scary, terrifying day.
As for me, when I really understood what was happening, I got scared. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to think. I felt helpless.
When the second tower fell, Paulie was on the 110th floor, and everybody was shouting, crying. I was praying to Jehovah because I was heartbroken.
Pablo and Sophie Ortiz tragically lost their son in the attacks of September 11th, 2001. But as this segment unfolds, notice how their grief is exploited as emotional leverage for Watchtower in a cheap attempt at portraying the organisation as understanding, compassionate and proactive in times of crisis. Notice too how another couple is shown telling their story of living through a terrorist attack, but the second couple's story turns out to be significantly less relevant.
We live on Voltaire Boulevard. It's a broad avenue. There is a concert hall called the Bataclan. When the doors of the Bataclan are open, we can hear everything that goes on inside.
That night, 3 men entered the Bataclan concert hall, and they started shooting into the crowd. We immediately grabbed our go bags, and then we sat in front of the sofa. And we begged Jehovah for his Holy Spirit so we could face the situation.
Nobody would suggest that it wouldn't have been very distressing, perhaps even terrifying, to be living around the corner from the Bataclan concert hall during the events of November 13th, 2015. But as hard as I try, I just can't wrap my head around why this couple's story is shown side by side with that of the Ortizes, as though the trauma suffered by both couples was somehow comparable. The Ortizes lost their son in the September 11th attacks, and outliving a child is any parent's worst nightmare. The B-Days, on the other hand, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing their names, lived close to where a terrorist attack took place. For me, the shabby way in which these 2 stories have been stitched together indicates a lack of sensitivity on the part of the production team, who are apparently more interested in drilling home their message of how wonderful Watchtower is than treating human grief and tragedy with the subtlety and thoughtfulness it deserves.
I quickly got in contact with the circuit overseer in order to get some news about our brothers and sisters to know how they were doing. Then, very early the next morning, we set up an emergency committee made up of several brothers from the service department. We decided to write a letter and make other arrangements to assist the friends who, in one way or another, were affected by this event.
So, during the terrorist attacks in Paris in November 2015, Watchtower leapt into action by assembling an all-male emergency committee who responded to a calamity in which 130 people were killed and over 350 injured by writing a letter and making other arrangements. It's quite possible that Jehovah's Witnesses watching this will be impressed at how organised and responsive the organisation is in times of calamity, but I'm sorry, I just can't find it within myself to be remotely impressed by any of this. The simple truth is that Watchtower does not respond in any meaningful way in times of crisis, especially when it comes to extending help to non-Jehovah's Witnesses.
In turn, the Circuit Overseer would make an effort to rapidly get in touch with the elders who oversee the affected territory.
One of our challenges on a personal level was whether we would even be able to encourage our brothers and sisters, because we had never experienced such a terrible event. We organized ourselves, we paired up as elders, and headed off to do shepherding.
Amazingly, at this point in the segment, the audience is expected to switch from thinking about the actual victims of a terrorist atrocity and instead spare a thought for the challenges facing elders tasked with doing shepherding.
We started calling mid-morning on Tuesday. We received a report back from all the traveling overseers by the end of Thursday. And unfortunately, we learned that 14 of our brothers and sisters had lost their lives.
We have just learned that 14 Jehovah's Witnesses were among the 2,753 who lost their lives during the 9/11 attacks. But how do we process this information in the context of a video where we have just been informed that God intervened in human affairs to make sure that a film about Hezekiah was completed on schedule? How do we respect a God who commands the weather so that a typhoon delivers sand to complete a Kingdom Hall building project on Yap, as we saw in the January 2016 JW Broadcasting episode, but who can only be a spectator when religious fanatics bring death and destruction by flying planes into buildings? Either God intervenes in Earth's affairs or he does not. And if Watchtower is going to use as emotional leverage stories of Jehovah's Witnesses suffering calamities, including untimely death, it urgently needs to abandon its distasteful habit of attributing mundane accomplishments to Jehovah's hand, as it currently does in almost every JW Broadcasting episode.
We knew that we needed to encourage the families. We knew that we needed to shepherd them as soon as possible.
The elders immediately came. We went over the book of Job, and I just listened, I was just listening. I've heard the same words before, but it was different now. The things that were being said went straight to my heart.
It could be that the Ortizes truly found comfort and solace from the pastoral care provided, but I can't see how Watchtower has done anything extraordinary in this situation. Certainly nothing that warrants being trumpeted in a self-promotional video. Wasn't it Jesus who supposedly remarked, "But you, when making gifts of mercy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing"?
When we were ultimately granted access to Ground Zero and we started encountering the first responders, that we let them know how much we appreciated their hard work and that they had a skill set that we didn't have. But yet our skill set was trying to offer comfort to them.
Less than a year after 9/11, I visited New York, and on one of the days of my trip, I spent some time around Ground Zero, which back then was still an immense hole in the ground. I recall encountering members of the New York Fire Department and shadowed them for a while as they appeared to be coming together for some kind of commemorative event. As I observed the tears and emotion as officers and family members reflected on the tragedy, doubtless mourning fallen comrades, fathers and mothers, husbands and wives, brothers and sisters, furthest from my mind was any notion that the skill sets of elders are remotely comparable to those of first responders who literally put their lives on the line for the sake of others. There is no skill in blindly following a group of religious leaders and using verses from the Bible to try to convince others to do the same. The more Watchtower tries to elevate its perceived role in coming to the rescue in times of calamity, the more paltry and cringeworthy its boasting sounds.
We shared a scripture with them. Immediately, we could tell that that was something that caused emotion to rise up in them right away. And they expressed great appreciation for that. It's one of the beautiful things about the scriptures is that they're calming, soothing, comforting. And the scriptures did not let down the workers that were there at Ground Zero either.
There are any number of books, writings, or poetry that can be considered calming and soothing. There is even, in case you're interested, a book titled The Little Book of Calm, containing a selection of comforting, soothing sayings and pieces of advice. The fact that verses can be found in the Bible that are calming does not make the book a message from God to humanity. Or if you do consider these as evidence to that effect, then you must put up with me making the exact same claim about the Little Book of Calm.
After the brothers visited us, we felt so comforted, so encouraged that we said to each other, we have to get back in the ministry and comfort people in the territory.
They've got back out into the territory so that they can console the people of Paris with the comforting message that soon all acts of terrorism will be ended by the biggest and bloodiest act of terrorism the world will ever have seen. Think of it as terrorism to end all terrorism.
I kind of felt, Jehovah's hand just reaching out to me, which I needed. But I cannot wait to the day that I'm totally refreshed, where I can actually see Paulie. I can see him just coming back into our lives, and I want to embrace him so much.
After something like this, we are not the same. But with the help of the organization, the brothers, Jehovah's there for us. So that is refreshing.
And I thank Jehovah a lot for what he wants to do for me, but also for the millions of people that feel the same way.
My heart goes out to the Ortizes. It's bad enough that they are still clearly struggling with intense grief as a result of losing their precious boy. But to have this grief exploited for propaganda value by a manipulative cult is nothing short of disgraceful. Though the Ortizes clearly feel Watchtower is helping them manage the pain of their loss to the point of praising the organisation in their sentiments, the truth is Watchtower is only making a bad situation worse by hijacking their son's memory and insisting that if they want to see him again, they must remain loyal to the governing body.
What these couples went through was a horrible reminder of Satan's rule, but we look forward to the relief from Jehovah, the only true hope we have.
Only Jehovah, apparently, provides relief from things like terrorism. And just to give you some context, I'm making this video in the 24 hours after the horrific bombing at the Manchester Arena, an arena that I used to go to for my conventions when I was a Jehovah's Witness. Over 20 people, mostly young people, killed, annihilated, their lives ended by people whose minds are overtaken, overwhelmed by religious dogma, basically. And it is a really messed up world that we live in. But I'm not buying for one moment the fact that just by putting trust in Geoffrey Jackson and his friends, everything will be magically made better. If anything, the solution that Geoffrey Jackson is proposing is one where everybody is killed, everybody is massacred. Who doesn't want to be a Jehovah's Witness? So no, I'm afraid I'm not buying what Geoffrey Jackson is selling. If there is relief to be found, it is to be found in humanity. It is to be found in examples such as the people who've been opening their homes in Manchester, the people who've been making their cars available, the people who've been just realizing that this is a time to step forward and provide help. That's where I find my relief, in the examples of people whose love for their fellow species, whose love for their fellow man transcends racial or religious boundaries. That's where I find my relief. Anyway, I'm afraid that's all I've got time for in this rebuttal video. I apologise if it ends up being rather long. There was a heck of a lot to get through there, as I'm sure you'll agree. I've had people asking me what I intend to do about the 2017 regional convention. If you follow my channel, you'll be aware that last year I did a series of videos called The Worst Convention Ever, which ended up being a 9-part series, which I bit off way more than I could chew. And it was only a few months ago that I ended up putting the last video together, but it was such a drain on my time. There's no way, I just cannot find the time to give it that level of attention again, but I do intend to put together a Friday, Saturday and Sunday rebuttal to the convention, showing some of the leaked videos, because basically the videos for the convention, one of which I've shown, the Lot's Wife video, they've been leaked out. They're now available online, as I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to use those to do rebuttals to each of the convention days. And I aim to do those, if I can, before I leave for America. In case you haven't seen, I put out a video a few weeks back where I mentioned that I'm coming to America to do some promotional work for my book and also some work on the film that I'm working on. So I'll be in New York, in Baltimore, in LA, in San Francisco, in Portland, in Seattle and in Vancouver. So if you're anywhere close to those cities, or if you can make it to any of those cities next month, check out that last video that I made in which I give you links to each of the events, so that you can go on Facebook and say, if you can use Facebook in that way, you can let me know whether you're able to attend any of those events. But I hope to get my convention rebuttals done before I get on the plane. I also want to take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to everybody who responded on Patreon. You may remember that I put out a video again a few weeks back where I was talking about the YouTube advertiser boycott, which, although it has eased up a little bit, it is here to stay now. Basically, if you're like me and you're producing content that can be remotely considered controversial, i.e. it's not about makeup tutorials or baking or pets or that kind of thing. Anything remotely controversial is not monetized to the same extent. You will still see ads appearing, but content creators like me are getting very little compared to what we were getting before. But I'm delighted to say that many of my subscribers have stepped forward and are basically making up for that. So there's now a nice amount on Patreon that can help me to justify taking the time away and taking the many days that are often required to put together long rebuttals like this in the kind of quality that I want to do. So thank you to everyone on Patreon who has helped to make this possible. So now I really have gone on for too long, and all that remains is for me to say that I really hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos, and as always, thank you for watching.